Welcome to Crypto in America Live, the only show bringing you candid conversations on the biggest news stories, legal issues, and policy developments shaping the crypto world every Friday afternoon. Good afternoon.
Hey guys,
Good afternoon. Happy Friday.
Happy first. It was between this and a USA World Cup jersey today, so very very busy week. But happy Friday.
And happy SpaceX IPO day.
Happy new issue day.
Yeah. My dad scared me today because he put on an England jersey and I was like, oh my God, are we playing today? And he's like, no, I don't think so. He's like, I just pulled this out of the ironing pile.
Like,
and
this is just what I do. Yeah, it's just Friday.
That's very British.
Yeah, no, SpaceX though, I mean, biggest IPO in history. And I mean, let's talk about it. It's our top story in our headlines today, but correct me if I'm wrong, Gerald, has it started trading yet?
I checked right before we started, and so I believe it will have started trading by the time this goes out. But
yes,
you could also argue it's already trading. I've seen a lot of threads around this on like the secondaries and like the hyperliquid price discovery stuff. Yep. I mean, that's not trading shares, but it is price discovery. So yeah, we'll see how it goes. Yeah.
And that orders were being filled. Some people were saying all their orders were filled, while others were saying they only got like 25% to 70%. So it's interesting to see where it lands. Are you guys buying it?
I haven't yet. So if I haven't, I'm too late, to be perfectly honest. Are you?
I think I'll buy some.
Yeah.
So I
not financial advice.
Yeah, not financial advice. I think for me, it's going to be a crazy one. Like I've seen a lot of people trying to back into the math. I think based on like 18 billion in revenue, something like that. It's trading at like 90x. Even in like a frothy market.
$1.7 trillion valuation.
Yeah, like price earnings right now in the S&P is hovering around like 20, and people are thinking that a lot of these like AI stocks are pretty frothy already. So what actually is an interesting alternative strategy, if you want, is to have just been accumulating ETF shares in space ETFs that will have allocation. So I know there's actually like a 3x levered one, which is pretty intense. And then there's a handful of other ones that obviously have been kind of ramping up. I read another tweet by somebody about like Virgin Galactic spiking today just because people don't know what they're buying.
Virgin Galactic, they went public in a SPAC in 2019, I believe.
Yeah.
And didn't do too well.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's up like 6% today. Yeah.
Instead of X, and so a lot of people were buying that one.
Yeah. Yeah, good to have a close but wrong ticker on a day like today.
Yeah. Well, just to give our audience some stats, they raised $75 billion at 135 per share, but it was 4 times oversubscribed. So around $250 billion is kind of what we were looking at from an investor perspective. It's the biggest IPO to ever come to Wall Street behind Saudi Aramco, which came to the street in 2020, I believe, right before COVID.
Yep.
Elon Musk said the company will use the capital to expand Starlink, which is, I think it's at least Musk's most profitable arm right now is Starlink. And we can all guess why, because that's the best product ever. If you've ever flown on a flight with Starlink, I think you can just...
I brought my Starlink on that trip.
Yeah, nice. It's so great. And then just fund the next growth phase. And I think from a crypto perspective, right, we talked to Ryan Rasmussen last week from Bitwise, and he said, I mean, this was kind of during the market turn down. It's come back a little bit. If we look at Bitcoin today, I think it's up maybe around 63,000, apologies. It's come back a little bit, but there is that element of investors pulling capital out from maybe some of these Bitcoin ETFs, putting money into the SpaceX IPO. Whether that's a long-term trend, we'll have to see. But we have a clip from Ryan. Maybe we can play that from the show from last week.
You also have the SpaceX IPO, Anthropic, OpenAI. All of these things are top of mind for investors. Crypto is not top of mind for most investors right now. And I think you're seeing that reflected in the level of demand we're seeing from most traditional investors.
Yeah. So traditional investors are definitely eyeing this IPO today.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what this does to liquidity. I know there's been a lot of rotation, like people there's so many theories about like where liquidity in crypto comes from, and rotating in and out of certain assets. I know we talked a little bit last week about like the rotation out of Zcash, and like Hyperliquid has been doing very well. AI stocks have obviously been on like an absolute tear, and one of the theories used to be that you could kind of count on some of that like tech growth to bring liquidity into crypto as well. So we'll see if this is good or bad long term for crypto investors. It's also hard when I think I saw another stat, Eleanor, you may have this, where essentially about 12 months out from mega IPOs, stocks tend to be down. So hopefully this doesn't pull liquidity out of like retail crypto investors if they're in at the wrong time and then get out at the wrong time. That would be bad. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting one for sure. Because and then of course we have OpenAI and Anthropic at similar sizes, you know, with like very different revenue, but similar sizes coming out to the market in the next few weeks. So I know this will be like a pretty big bellwether for where we are in IPO land.
Yeah, very exciting. So we also have the CFTC unveiling prediction market rule proposal this week, which was also pretty exciting for those who have been waiting for this. Another example of the CFTC working overtime, I think, you know, Mike Seelig, the CFTC chair, just came out with a guidance / proposal for crypto perps, kind of following up on the things that he said he was going to do this year. Prediction markets is, of course, a big one. Some things that stood out to me were it creates a process for determining which event contracts are allowed and which are, quote unquote, contrary to the public interest. I think some of the things we saw were not entirely surprising. Some of the things that are not in the public interest are betting on war, terrorism, assassination, illegal activity, etc. There were some specifics about gaming in there. Some certain sports-related contracts are not contrary to the public interest, which has led some people to believe that maybe they are, suggesting that they'll continue to allow sports-related contracts. So definitely going to be some weighing in from the public there. I think it's a 90-day comment period, so that will start from when it was released this week. But big for prediction markets as they continue to kind of permeate in this market.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting, I guess, like what's happening overall with the CFTC right now. I know we're going to get into some of this. Good to see them continuing to roll out rules in this kind of Wild West market and want to police it. I know Chair Seelig has been super clear about that, you know, they want to police bad actors and kind of have a framework here. So yeah, we'll see how it goes. I know sports contracts were like the biggest one that everybody was kind of trying to figure out how that's gonna settle. So yeah, good to see progress.
I was hesitant to comment on this as Eleanor talked about the news because I'm not a big fan of prediction markets in general. That's just my opinion, but I think going against the ones that are contrary to public interest should be like the bare minimum here, right? Because like betting on things that could have serious implications, not from like a fun, you know, society, cultural standpoint, but like war, terrorism, death, just probably not the best thing to allow people to bet on. So good move.
Yeah. And an example of that was we saw the example of that with, I believe it was Kalshi and the payouts surrounding the death of the Iranian Ayatollah. And
yes,
controversy
and
around
I believe they didn't even pay it out in the end, right?
I would have to look that one up. Can't remember the outcome, but I remember there was some
phone a friend from Kalshi.
Phone a friend, yes. There was outrage about that.
Yeah, I know there was a difference between the way Polymarket and Kalshi were settling it. And they've had, this is kind of what it comes down to a lot of the time, is how you actually settle like the fine print around a lot of these contracts. I think the other interesting thing is, you know, we've talked before on the show about like insider trading and incentives to use these contracts. So like there was another story that came out earlier this week about a Spanish football team that was about to be relegated, placing like a massive bet on prediction market as a hedge. I think shout out Matt Levine, Money Stuff. If you don't read Matt's column, it's always pretty entertaining and pretty in the weeds. They actually ended up not getting relegated, so they technically lost, but it was an interesting hedge. And then you have to look at like, all right, is that insider trading? There's also a big case with an NCAA athlete right now on his participation in these markets. What I was going to say is that a lot of these markets that aren't in the public interest, you want binary futures to inform price discovery, right? Like that's the whole point of having a binary future is you have informed participants basically stating their opinion. So the corn farmer in Iowa saying, "Oh, I think it's going to be a pretty bad year. Let me hedge against the crops this year," or something, and then that informs how everybody else thinks these commodities are going to perform. The problem with ones that are against the public interest is the MNPI has to come from somewhere where somebody has like not great incentives. Like they're either going to be informed markets by the wrong people, so like a soldier on the ground, someone with security clearance, that kind of stuff, or they're not going to be that informed, so they're not that good for price discovery mechanisms anyways, and then you're just like YOLOing into like just, you know, are we going to invade Cuba? So yeah, it's good to see it kind of get back to the scope and the original intent of like why we have binary futures like options at all.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we also have
Going
Gary
back to that thing, yeah.
weighing in here too. Did you guys see that?
Had what?
What do you say?
Gary Gensler weighing.
Oh yeah, do we have a clip, or you just want to talk about it?
No, we don't have the clip,
Okay.
but he went on CNBC to talk about how the states are totally in the right here, and they should be regulating prediction markets and not the CFTC, and that's how it was supposed to be under Dodd-Frank when he was at the CFTC. I believe he was CFTC chairman when Dodd-Frank was written, so he's weighing in here, and crypto community has a lot to say about it. I'll say that.
Yeah, and I saw, I think even Brian Quinten's clap back a little bit on Twitter on this one, and it like the opinion that nobody wanted, like it's yeah, I think like it's just you know, yeah, I think it's fun to weigh in after you're kind of back in academia.
Yeah. Jackie, I cut you off. Sorry. What were you going to say?
I was related to what Gerald was saying before about troops, and then like if a soldier's on the ground or something like that, like there was that situation where troops were evacuated, and I believe like there was a Polymarket or call sheet bet on like whether or not they would be evacuated by this date, and it like spiked before it actually was announced that they were, you know, evacuated, and then that becomes like a security risk too, because like what if the operation fails or something gets interrupted by it because someone saw that bet, and then all of a sudden it's like compromised, you know? So I think that
Yeah.
probably falls under the contrary to public interest too.
Yes. Then you had the Maduro situation with the Green Beret. There's many such examples.
Mhm.
I think that's why you're seeing the urgency around putting some guardrails, some rules in place for prediction markets. Kind of like crypto, but they seem to be doing this a lot faster than they did for crypto. Sam Bankman-Fried applied for a pardon. Not entirely surprising, but what I thought was interesting about this one is that he applied for a pardon after he finishes his sentence. So this is not a pardon like a right-away pardon, although I'm sure he would welcome a right-away pardon as well from President Trump, but this is actually one that would pardon him when he's done with his sentence. So he applied through the DOJ. I mean, he's serving a 25-year sentence. He's 2 years out of that right now. He's served 2. So President Trump will not be the president anymore if he completes that sentence. So he may be applying to a pardon from a different president. But, you know, notable that he did apply this week, but not entirely surprising, as I say. But he is also in the process of appealing his conviction as well.
Yep. Yeah. So he didn't ask for a commutation either, which is shortening of the criminal sentence being served, that 25 years you brought up, Ellie. But he's also, again, trying to appeal the sentence that he's maintaining that he is innocent.
Yeah.
So
But Trump
just
Trump
keeps coming back.
Trump doesn't seem like he wants to pardon him. I think the White House has said in the past that Trump is not planning to pardon him, and I think Trump has said something along the lines himself. He shouldn't expect the same treatment as Russell Richt or CZ or any of the other crypto folks he's pardoned in the past. I think Sam Bankman-Fried kind of goes against Trump's political ethos when it comes to party campaign cash and and not that kind of thing.
The payment, yeah.
But you never know with Trump, so we'll have to see. But
Yeah, I guess this is just the sausage of like the legal process here, right? I know there was kind of like a quiet campaign to get pardoned for a while. A lot of sort of other folks, chiming in on Twitter on whether or not that was a good or a bad thing. I know his parents had been pretty aggressive about it. As you mentioned, he's got the appeal. And then the interesting thing is like he does have a 25-year sentence, but he was, I forget how old exactly he was when he went in. So if you were going to get a pardon when you finish the sentence, the other thing that this comes with is like a ban on future activities. Right. So if you're now in the camp that like, all right, maybe I'll get out of jail when I'm like 40, 45 or something. What am I going to do with my life? If you want to go back into trading or like other activities like that, like you would need the slate kind of wiped clean there. So interesting strategy. And I know he's got, a pretty aggressive legal team that he's been satisfied and dissatisfied with at various times. So yeah, I guess just the wheels keep turning over there.
The wheels too keep turning. Also crazy anecdote on this front too is that the FTT token, which was the token behind the very much bankrupt and dormant FTX exchange, surged over 50% in
very
24
much
hours. I'm trying to make it clear that this token has no utility, no purpose, etc.
right.
It's still tied to FTX, of course, but kind of crazy that people are trading on him and the news around that. Definitely wouldn't put my money there.
Yeah, I mean, for what it's worth, I think like Ethereum Classic still trades at like $7. That's for everybody who doesn't know, that's the pre-DAO hack, like unforked Ethereum that also has zero utility and doesn't do anything. I think even Terra still trades around. Like it's it's interesting, these like zombie tokens. Yeah.
Well, before we bring in Patrick Witt, let's do a little quick rundown of some of the news around Clarity this week, because Patrick did tweet earlier in the week that kind of teased a big week for activities surrounding the Clarity Act. So here's what we know, what went down. A bipartisan group of senators met Tuesday to discuss ethics. Democrats came away from that meeting feeling like the goalposts had been moved after Republicans in the White House had walked back a key part of a tentative agreement reached before the banking markup in May. And a little bit about that agreement: Senate Ag basically may sue the DOJ over failure to enforce certain ethics provisions. That was part of the tentative agreement, I was told. Republicans say it was in reaction to other senators, walking this agreement back was in reaction to other senators voicing concerns that they themselves maybe be targeted by some of these overzealous attorney generals. And we know some of these state AGs can be a little overzealous at times. And then there was also a meeting this week of around 5 law enforcement groups held at the White House to discuss ongoing concerns over the BRCA, with attendance from administration officials, members of Congress, and David Sachs. So let's bring in Patrick Witt, Executive Director of the White House Crypto Council, to tell us all about this big week for Clarity and to tell us what's currently going on with negotiations, what we can expect going forward. Patrick, welcome back to the show.
Thanks. Good to be with y'all.
Good to see you.
You too. All right. I'm going to ask you the headline question to kick us off. The White House set a goal of July 4th for the Clarity Act to be passed. Is that still the timeline you guys are working with, or have your expectations shifted?
No, I think we're still making great progress across the 3 areas that Democrat senators had raised as ones that they wanted to see progress on. So every day we're doing the trifecta, either mornings or afternoons on ag, mornings or afternoons on ethics, and then the BRCA as that third one. So we're making progress on all fronts every day. Groups are at the table, trading paper. And so I'm still optimistic that we could hit that timeline, but we're doing a lot of work behind the scenes.
Yeah. And Ellie mentioned before some of the conversation around ethics, and I know the Democrats are characterizing the White House and Republicans as going back on the ethics agreement that was reached in May before the markup. Do you think that's a fair characterization of what really happened on Tuesday?
I don't. As we've talked about with Democrat colleagues throughout this, when I'm dealing with staff, they say they have to take it back to their bosses, or when I'm dealing with Democrat senators, they have to take it back to their caucus. Well, I'm like a broken record in all these meetings. I have a boss, I have a caucus, and the Republican senators do as well. We had worked in earnest to try and flesh out some different parts of a potential deal there. As Republican senators brought it to their other colleagues, to the Senate Ethics Committee, as we have gotten further input from White House counsel and others in my building, there were areas that had been pointed out as cause for concern. So no deal had been reached such that you could walk it back. The commitment was always to try and get it to a place where it was ready to socialize, and that's exactly what we did, what the Republican senators who are working on this did as well. And that was the feedback that came back. And, the part about state AG enforcement in particular, that was shared by a bipartisan group of senators as being cause for concern. I think Senator Moreno the other day put it well. The shoe's going to be on the other foot at some point in the future. And what might seem right now like a good idea, you might come to regret. So, those senators and, House members as well, obviously want to make sure that we don't give the opposition party, whoever's in charge, a weapon that could cause a lot of problems and certainly do a lot more damage than they're trying to achieve with this provision.
Yeah, Patrick, I know when we met with you back at the White House for that interview a few months ago, you mentioned kind of the constitutionality of applying rules like this and how it would need to be sort of broad-based and applicable. And you just mentioned kind of the bipartisan nature of this and the notion that putting something in this place is not just a moment in time, right? It's real sort of go forward legislation. How do you think the rest of the sort of constituents here, whether it's leaders in Congress, as the Senate, are reacting to like the plans that are being proposed, knowing that it's not just going to sit with kind of one individual in his family? Like, how do you see that playing out, and just even related back to the constitutionality of putting something like this together that you mentioned when we spoke earlier?
Yeah, I think when talking with folks on the other side of the aisle, I'm trying to, everyone's coming up with hypotheticals, and I'm trying to also share some hypotheticals for instances where it might not seem like this would be an issue, but actually it could create a whole host of issues. And you think about potential resources that would get diverted. Senators are missing votes or hearings because they're getting deposed on frivolous lawsuits that are being brought by political opposition, parties or plaintiffs, what have you. So, as I try and bring to life, this is not a partisan thing. Think about put your boss, or if it's a senator themselves, in the shoes of being on the other side of this. We have to think through how this could be abused and make sure that we're not creating bad law in this process. So I think lately we've had some great discussions about that, and we're continuing to make progress.
Mm-hmm. Following yesterday's law enforcement meeting hosted by you guys and the Crypto Council, Patrick, do you think the conversation around the BRCA and the meeting yesterday, do you think it really moved the needle?
I do. It was a great discussion. It was not the first one that we've had. We've had a lot of discussions with law enforcement groups, and wanted to bring them all together, have them have an opportunity to sit with House Majority Whip Emmer. My boss, David Sachs, came in and spoke about it from a technology perspective and global competitiveness. We had the FinCEN team there from Treasury. We had DOJ representatives. So, in the room with the experts, answering questions, and it was a great dialogue. So I'm optimistic that it was a step forward. I think, those discussions will continue, and I'm cautiously optimistic that we're going to arrive at a good place on that bill, or on that provision rather.
David, Patrick, you mentioned that David Sachs was in the room. What is his involvement like on the front of digital assets now? Is he still in the White House pretty frequently, or how does that look?
Yeah, still as involved as ever. We were grateful to have him the other morning, and he's staying engaged. We talk all the time, so he's fully up to speed with where we are. And as I've told David throughout this process, there's a lot of legwork that needs to be done at my level with staff, and eventually we're going to get to the point where it's time for the principals to serve as the closers. So we're getting very close to that point, and it'll be David and the other principals and senators involved in this process to bring it home. But not quite there yet, but very, very close to arriving in the ninth inning and bringing in the closer.
Patrick, I want to go back to the conversation around BRCA. So I was on the Hill earlier this week with BA, having a bunch of conversations with folks, and it seems like there's still sort of a reluctance, and maybe it's a little more on one side of the aisle than the other, but obviously kind of a bipartisan issue, that the way BRCA is currently written would somehow constrain law enforcement from going after folks and maybe limit the use of 1960, which the use of it under the previous administration was kind of non-traditional from like litigators that or criminal prosecutors that I've talked to. Do you think that we are closer to finding text that works for the industry? Because it seems like there's this massive toolkit out there. We've talked about some of the vendors, who are like the TRMs, the chain analysis, like all these other folks who are very well versed in helping law enforcement deal with these types of cases. And then there's still obviously the ability to, prosecute criminals, without needing to point to the notion that they wrote code. So do you think we're closer to an understanding there, or you still see a gap? Like how do you see that playing out?
I do, and that's why the meeting we had the other day, the other conversations we've had with these groups have been so important, is because it's coming from a good place, and we're on the same team. We don't want there to be illicit finance in crypto. We don't want there to be illicit finance at all, and so we want to be thoughtful about this. We understand that the law enforcement groups, have a difficult job, and we don't want to do anything that ties their hands. The individuals in the room from Treasury, from FinCEN, from DOJ, were all laying out how they believe in a BRCA world. They still have all of the tools that they need to bring the cases and to get after bad actors in the space. DOJ, for example, just brought a new case the other day, demonstrating that we have the desire to go after bad actors, and we have all the tools that we need to bring the cases that we need. So what we've tried to stress with them is a lot of the hypotheticals that come up are examples of people who are not truly decentralized, not truly creating open source code that's non-custodial. These are protocols or intermediaries that would be completely outside the scope of the BRCA as written. And so bringing to life for them that dividing line between where one crosses over into custody and control. All of the hypotheticals that we've heard so far would clearly be captured would rather be outside of the scope of the BRCA. We're talking about that narrow subset of folks that are truly just writing code. They're patching cybersecurity deficiencies in a protocol. That downstream third-party liability, dramatic expansion that could exist without the BRCA in place would severely hamper the ability of the United States to have relevance in the age of crypto. And David really made an excellent point in the Wednesday meeting, talking about without something similar, the advent of the internet would not have it wouldn't have developed in the same way. It certainly wouldn't have developed here in the United States if people developing the protocols for the internet that we now know and enjoy, and all the attendant benefits that have come from that technological development. Similarly here, we're not going to be able to realize the full potential of this technology if people have uncertainty about legal liability in cases where they are completely innocent and just writing code with no intent, no knowledge that it will be used for illicit finance.
Patrick, before we let you go, There's just 2 weeks left until the July 4th recess. So in that meantime, what are the key steps that you guys are going to be taking in the meantime to keep the Clarity Act progress, bringing it to the floor, moving forward?
Well, every day we're meeting on the ag side of things to close out that BRCA. There's daily steps and conversations that are taking place between groups to get them more comfortable with that language. And then, as I mentioned earlier, continue negotiations daily on the ethics provision. So progress being made on all fronts, but we're getting to the point where I think it's going to be elevated to principal level to close out the final issues. But there's a ton of work going on behind the scenes. It's a team effort. White House, Treasury, other administration officials, Senate Banking Committee, Senate Ag Committee are all working very, very hard. And I know industry is at the table as well, trying to find solutions for some of these areas where there's policy objectives that Democrats want to achieve, and needing to come up with some creative solutions. So, we're pushing on all fronts of this, and I'm confident that we're right on the cusp of getting it done.
Patrick, before we let you go real quick, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I know one of the other things that's come up as a blocker here has been the appointment of a full slate of CFTC commissioners in particular, but it seems like there's been asks kind of across the board for more appointments. Do you think we'll see any movement on appointments from the White House in the next few weeks, months?
I can tell you that the White House has reached out multiple times to Leader Schumer's office, soliciting names for the SEC and the CFTC, and we're waiting. So,
got it.
Thanks, Patrick.
Well,
all right,
Patrick.
thank you
Thanks,
very
Patrick.
much.
Good to see you.
Well, turning to what is sometimes described as the third leg of the stool when it comes to crypto policy, that's taxes. You got stable coins, you got market structure, and then you got taxes. But committee Republicans on the House Ways and Means Committee rolled out 6 bills and a discussion draft aimed at addressing everything from mining and staking rewards, reporting requirements, donations, tax treatment parity, disclosure, and just about everything else that you can think of, except Bitcoin de minimis, but we will be talking to our next guest, Trish Turner, about that. She is the executive director at Crypto Tax Girl. She's a former IRS executive as well. Please bring in Trish. So excited to have you on the show.
Hi, guys. How are you today?
Welcome.
Good. How are you?
Busy. Even after tax season's over, it's still busy. This week was a very busy week as well. So we got a lot of things still happening, and a lot of taxpayers that are still in the extension period. So we're working through all of that as well.
Yeah, I know for sure. So you told me earlier this week after the hearing that you thought the hearing had a lot of substance, but that some of the proposed legislation still has some gaps that you would like to see filled. So maybe before we get to some of those gaps, you can kind of give us an overview of what the current proposals would do for crypto holders that they currently don't do.
Sure. So yeah, I did feel like there was a lot of substance, and I felt like the right people are at the table, industry, academics, as well as the legislators, all asking really good questions. I think it's the first time that I've seen this in-depth of questions from any of the legislators parceling out those pieces that came through on the parity. With parity, it's obviously a big bill like that was one for everybody to kind of swallow, to understand all those pieces. So I do think they made the right step in starting to parcel those out and to understand what each of those impacts would be, not just to taxpayers, but to implementation on the government level and what that might be on the competitive level when we look at domestic and international. Some of those pieces they carried through on parity. Some they did some enhancements, and then I saw some that just didn't make it quite over. You mentioned just before that the Bitcoin de minimis wasn't in there, which I found was interesting, being that in the parity they had put in there to do a study for 12 months, and that wasn't in there either. So I don't know if that's a lost cause right now, or they're just punting on that. It does seem to be a bigger issue because there's more there's more swings with Bitcoin and ETH than there would be a stable coin. So I'm sure that has a lot of discussion that they're considering on that front. A lot of things with the other pieces, mining, staking, obviously the week before this comes out, there's a big case that's settled, or that goes to court. That's not necessarily settled, I would say. But it was on the opposing piece on the first case that came through, where they made it so that, you know, mining and staking would be upon receipt. So in the previous case, it was treated a little bit differently. Not to say that was necessarily what the government's position was, but it was treated differently. So those are some big things that came out of it for me. The voluntary disclosure thing was huge as well. I think that is something that was needed. I think that's welcome to any of the crypto holders out there that have been kind of waiting back to kind of see if they're going to come forward or how they should position themselves in this. So given that amnesty program was quite nice to see. I was a part of the last big amnesty program, the offshore voluntary disclosure program. So that was kind of nice to know that their penalty structure is similar. And then if they come in later, there'll be obviously increased penalties. That's kind of the big things right now for that moving over from the parity to what was going to hit the different bills as they came out.
Yeah. Trish, I'm curious from your perspective how this would kind of make it easier for Americans to file crypto taxes. I know a big complaint from a lot of crypto people is that they have so many transactions, they have it across a bunch of different wallets, right? They don't know how to pull it together, but maybe their accountants don't take them seriously. Is there a world where this will actually become as quote unquote easy, even though filing taxes is never that easy, as the traditional taxes? Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic question. So, you know, as I watched the hearing once and then about 2.5 times total after I parceled out some of those sections as well to listen to some of the different speakers. One of the things that I would have liked to have seen is more emphasis on the per transaction level reporting. So you have the 1099 DA that came out during the proposed rulemaking process. The carve out was for DeFi, but also the carve out was removing some of those parts on the 1099 DA that included the transaction ID and the wallet addresses, which from the IRS and Treasury's perspective were pieces that were put on there within the regulation to help enforcement. Once those were removed, the understanding for per transaction level is still kind of a question for me. I'm not quite sure what the need is and why they couldn't roll those up into a summary reporting, which I think would make things not only easier for the taxpayer, but easier for brokers and an easier lift for the IRS, who needs to enforce, obviously compliance levels. I think Coinbase had spoke to 800 million 1099 DAs that they had issued so far. That's just, again, a portion of what's out there for those that were brokers. And then, that's only going to grow. So if stablecoins and NFTs were carved out and they were put on a summary listing on the 1099-D, the capability is already built in there. I don't think that needs to be a legislative fix. I think the carve out's already in the 6045 regulations. It would just need to be a directive from the legislators to do that. I do think that would help.
Yeah, on that note, Trish, I know wash trading has been discussed pretty heavily as a topic that folks are concerned about. You mentioned some of the volatility around non-stablecoin assets, and then I think the industry just has an enormous challenge with the amount of reporting and activity in crypto overall that could be captured by this. Where do you think we're going to end up on wash trading?
I think wash trading, it's inevitable that it's going to go away. Both sides are in agreement on that. I think that was kind of what we're seeing. So I see that as being kind of a low-hanging fruit, in that they both agree. I don't know when that's going to happen or the timing on that, but for taxpayers out there, they should probably watch that because obviously if the rule hits right before year end, you could be problematic for your tax filing season.
What would you say is the most sort of realistic path that happens after a hearing like this, Trish? Because we know that clarity is the first and foremost priority here. Crypto taxes, like I said, kind of the third leg of the stool, everybody refers to them as. But I think if we get some movement on clarity this year, would this be something that we see come up in a different, if the House shifts parties in November after the midterms, do you think that the legislation, the bill proposals that were rolled out this past week have any chance at moving forward under a different, House leadership? Kind of what do you see going from here out of this hearing that we saw this week?
I do for several different reasons, but I do think there's going to be a path forward. How quickly that happens with each of these issues obviously is going to be Time to tell, but there's a lot of agreement on both sides of the fence. So I feel like there is going to be movement regardless of who comes in or where things sit in a couple months or even in a couple of years.
Mhm.
A couple of things that I do think are worth mentioning is in the hearing, the questions were, why should we make this a priority over Social Security? Not even necessarily clarity versus parity or even these bills, but also over just other things that need to happen at the government level, which I think is a great question. Part of it is to quantify what the tax gap is or what the non-compliance rate is to make this a priority. Is something that they've struggled with. They've struggled with for years. And that's why when first implementation came for the 1099 DA, or even before that, with the John Doe summons of Coinbase for enforcement levels, they couldn't, it's very hard to enforce crypto or to understand without those third-party, information reporting that was there. So I think with that being said, they know that that's an issue because they can't quantify it and they don't know the numbers. And to get behind those numbers is pretty difficult to do as well. So you have that piece, but then you also have, if they don't provide clarity or guidance, they're going to lose traction on being competitive at the international level, which we're already seeing. We're already seeing Switzerland and a couple of the other European countries move forward with full, complete packages that known investors or people that want to come there know the risks already. And right now you can't see that. They talked about income sourcing. There's a lot of things they didn't even touch on, which include the transfer pricing and the PFIC for DAOs and things like that, where we're already seeing formations or these exotic entities being treated differently as they treat them through the different countries that are most have the path of least resistance when it comes to rules and regulations.
Yeah. I don't think it's necessarily fair of me to ask you this, but given that so much of this happens maybe behind closed doors and we don't actually have a quantifiable number of how many transactions go missed, what would you guess is actually the real number?
Transactions missed. I don't know that we
or not reported.
Oh, not reported for like a number.
Yes.
I'm currently working on that problem myself. I've been working on some research on that. And in the Joint Committee released a number, which is the reason below or the reason supporting the 1099 DA for the 6045 regs. And they put that number at 28 billion over 10 years of recovery. Again, that's not the actual gap, but that's the recovery piece. Knowing that the percentage or the non-compliance level without information reporting usually sits at about 40 to 45%. And then as information reporting is implemented, that grows each year that it's out there into the 80%. I think it's well into probably the hundreds of billions. I don't think we can quantify it necessarily. We have still wash sales are there. So we have that ability to kind of move those or defer those gains on. We also have some other issues that with fraud, which fraud is a growing piece of the whole digital asset landscape that we don't really have our handle on yet. I was hoping to kind of see something or at least some mention for some tax relief when it comes to fraud for those victims. That part is still not quantifiable, but I do think it's quite big. And they can't get their hands on it either. It's too hard to quantify. We also carved out DeFi a couple of years ago with the broker reporting. So that's a big hole on top of anything that would be offshore.
Yeah, on that offshore note, Trish, I know one of the things that the industry was looking for, particularly when the administration started, was some path to onshoring assets for some of these international vehicles, right? And so there was the kind of, I guess, precedent set of sort of a repatriation window with some of the big tech companies several years ago. And it seems like that has maybe not fallen to the wayside, but there's much more sort of granular details that folks are trying to work through. Do you think we're going to have any progress on that front, or how do you see that playing out?
I would hope so. I think you're right on the granular piece. I think it comes into some treaties and some other things that might play into that, especially when you start to think about IP, which is the intellectual property, and moving that back over and what the risks are associated with. Well, is the IP truly a US IP? Is it international? Who brought it where first? There could be implications there as well as risks and penalties. So I think there's exposure for both the government to open that up as well as for taxpayers or businesses to bring it here. I think there's a path to it. It's just right now they're picking kind of the basic, I don't want to say basic because nothing in crypto is basic. So let's, let's clear that up, especially when it comes to taxes. But some of those things that have been kind of churning around for quite a few years, trying to get those things right on the domestic level makes sense. But I don't think we're moving fast enough at the international level for taxation. And we're losing some traction there by not addressing that. And that wasn't addressed in this room, at least this week, at least from the bill perspective, it was with some of the speakers.
Trish, I have to get your reaction to the Illinois crypto tax bill. We talked about it on the show a couple of times, but they recently approved that 0.2%, 20 basis point tax on certain digital asset transactions. We talked about what kind of message that might send to crypto holders and businesses in the States. But from your perspective, I mean, what's your reaction there?
Interesting one. The states and the federal. So there's a lot of work that's done even at the federal level that we worked with the states in general on compliance. So I'm curious to understand kind of what the drive necessarily was behind putting it on a transaction level. That because it feels more like a toll booth, as far as that goes. So, you have a toll road out there, which Illinois has lots of tolls because I live right across the river in Iowa. And I drive on those roads quite a bit. And those tolls are meant to really rebuild that infrastructure. So the tax, the 2%, the 0.2% at the transaction level felt more like a toll. But then I'm thinking, what is that infrastructure really building? Or is it building anything? Right. So Illinois as a state itself really isn't building anything on the blockchain that this would be supporting. So that takes me back to the tax and the compliance level and them losing dollars at that level. And I think that's probably what their reasoning is for trying to get that at the transactional level. I do think it's going to hurt them or people, investors there. And I probably see some of those smaller brokers, if they're there now, they're probably going to look at moving out. It's just it's too expensive to scale that, especially enforcement, because they're going to have to do withholdings and whatnot. And so there's going to be a lot of implementation costs that will go around that. So it's time to tell to kind of see who stays and who goes. But I do think it's going to overall maybe hurt movement in the state, or at least growth for crypto.
Trish, thank you so much. We'll have you back for sure.
Thanks, Trish.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Trish.
Take care. Have a good weekend.
You too.
You
too.
All right. Well, to wrap up the hour, we have Lucas Bruder. He's the CEO of Jito Labs. Lucas was one of 60 CEOs to sign a letter to Senate leadership this week, urging them to pass the Clarity Act with the BRCA and software developer protections intact. Welcome, Lucas.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming back on. So you got 60 plus CEOs to sign this letter. Where are we in the debate right now with the BRCA and law enforcement? We just had Patrick Witt on. He said that we were making progress in that area. Does it feel like progress is being made from, the CEO and developer side?
Yeah, I think so. I think this is super important for us. We want to keep building in America. And I think that given some of the previous things that are happening in other administrations, I think this is super necessary for open source developers to keep building in the US.
Lucas, I know we just pulled up your tweet too, and you said it was incredibly obvious to support and sign it. But why is it so important to you and these other CEOs to be a part of BRCA on this side? And then what can be the implications if it doesn't actually go through?
Yeah, so we want to keep building in the United States. I grew up in the United States. My parents were entrepreneurs. I went to college in the US, and I've seen some people go overseas to other countries that are a little more friendly towards crypto. And so continuing to build here is super important for me and many other builders, and not having to lose sleep over, am I going to get a letter or get in trouble for what I'm doing? And the BRCA essentially says that if you are building non-custodial software, that you are not a money transmitter. And so and there's a bunch of rules that come around if you're custodying funds and you're a money transmitter. And we don't do that at Jito. There's many other in the industry that don't do that. And so this is a necessary protection for like myself, people in my team, other companies to really build comfortably throughout whoever is, in the administration.
Yeah, Lucas, I want to ask you about that piece. So, like as a lawyer, I feel like I have a pretty good handle on BRCA. I know there's a lot of staffers who are, getting their minds around it, and they're kind of in the room talking about legislation all the time, right? CEOs, I think, understand the importance, but like day to day, how do you get sort of people on your team or developers bought into kind of how this might impact them? Is it just like a planning sort of strategic issue, or like, what are you doing to kind of make sure that obviously devs aren't distracted by this, but sort of understand how this impacts them in the industry?
Yeah. To be honest, we really try to shield a lot of, or maybe not shield, that's not the right word, but we don't bring it up a ton with our engineers. We have Rebecca Reddick, who's like the most badass legal and policy person that you could ever want. And she's doing a lot of conversations. She's really in the loop on things. We do like share policy updates generally within the company every like 2 weeks or so. So like what's going on with Clarity and BRCA and CFTC and SEC and all this stuff. So yeah, we really try to keep people updated, but we don't want it to be a distraction for people. And we want Rebecca and other people to really be involved, and myself, and getting people aware of what's going on and really trying to advocate for protections for developers in the US.
Is there any change to the BRCA that you could live with at this point, or is this really one of those issues that developers are stuck on, and you believe the language should stay exactly as it is? I know that Whip Emmer was at the law enforcement meeting with the White House this week, and he said, the language is not changing, it's staying how it is. I'm sure many in industry feel this way, but is there any wiggle room at this point, or it's really kind of just, here's where we're at, meet us where we're at, or nothing?
Yeah. To be honest, I'm not like super intimate with all the language and what people are talking about potentially dropping, but I think the point stands. Like I just want to build in the US. Like I'm a builder, grew up here my whole life. And so we shouldn't have to think about these things. And it's kind of a distraction for us. So I just want good regulatory policy, and I want to keep building in the US.
Yeah. You guys said you were coming back to the US party not so long ago. It was almost a year ago. Is that
yeah.
right?
I think so.
Yeah.
Lucas, are you hiring in the US right now? Is that kind of like the mandate internally, or are you looking still internationally?
Yeah, we have only been hiring in the US for the past, or no, sorry. We have not only been hiring in the US, but we've been hiring a lot of US people. I think at Jito Labs, we're right around 28, 29 people today. I would say that at least 25 of those people are in the US. We're going to continue hiring heavily in the US. We make a lot of revenue. We pay a lot of taxes. We love building in the US. We want to keep doing it. So yeah, we'll continue to invest heavily in the US.
How are things going with the US Foundation side of things? I don't know how directly involved you are in that side, but curious on how that's going.
Yeah, I'm a little bit involved. I would say it's coming pretty well. There's still a few things that we need more clarity on. So I think last time we went to the Hill, we were talking about more clarity on 501c4 status for people that work on open source software. So that's one thing. And then there's another kind of like, I think there's some tax related things that need to be worked on as well. And so I think we'll get to that at some point. Right now, I think the focus is like BRCA, clarity, and then we can start to go there. Because yeah, I mean, we moved our foundation back on shore and started a Jito Foundation. It's a 501c4. And for those that are listening, basically every crypto foundation, except for a very, very small number of them, are based in the Caymans or Panama or outside the US. And so there's a ton of economic activity happening outside the US to run these foundations. And we want to bring that back on shore as well. And so the 501c4 is like the way that we kind of chose to do that. I think there's a few other ways. There's, I think the Duna is one of them. But yeah, we think we think we need to get more foundations back on shore. Hopefully we start to see more people do that soon, and we can kind of start to work through the open questions as soon as all this stuff passes.
Yeah, amazing. Well, Lucas, thank you so much for coming on today, and keep us posted on how things pan out.
Will do. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Lucas.
Thanks.
All right.
Happy
Have a great
Friday.
weekend.
Thanks everyone for listening.
Go
in.
USA.
Happy Friday.
Watch
Yes.
the soccer. Touch grass.
Not rooting for the USA. Oops, what?
What?
Rooting
Go
for
US.
England.
You're American.
England.
You're American. I'm gonna send you a jersey.
This is crypto in America, Ellie.
I'm gonna
All
have
right,
to,
well.
you're gonna have to have something for Binance. You can't. Yeah, we got to do something.
Well, I'm gonna be wearing my English jersey. We don't even know who's playing in that match yet.
It's America.
Hopefully it's
Bye,
England.
guys.
All right. Bye, all.
Bye.
Bye.